The W&G, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Confederation, stretched 3 kilometers across, a monument to 1,000 civilizations unified under one banner. Holographic representations of 847 species floated in concentric rings around the central platform, each delegation positioned according to their species' age in the stars. The eldest species, who had sailed between worlds when Earth's ancestors were still climbing trees, occupied the innermost circle. The youngest sat in the outer darkness, barely visible. Humanity occupied the outermost ring. Ambassador Marcus Reed stood on the platform, his plain black suit a stark contrast to the elaborate bioluminescent robes, crystalline exoskeletons, and phase-shifted forms surrounding him. He had been speaking for 20 minutes, presenting evidence of systematic attacks on human colonies. The holographic displays showed burning settlements, civilian casualties, children's bodies pulled from rubble. His voice remained steady, professional, despite the rage burning in his chest. 17 confirmed attacks over the past 6 months. Reed continued, manipulating the display to show colony locations. New Singapore, Terra Nova, Kepler's Hope. Each strike targeted civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, agricultural centers. The Vraxian sovereignty has made no secret of their intentions. They want humanity eradicated from the Outer Rim territories. A sound rippled through the assembly. It took Reed a moment to recognize it. Laughter. High Chancellor Zixther, a being of crystallized thought energy from a species that had conquered entropy itself, pulsed with amused colors. Ambassador Reed, the translation matrix, rendered his thoughts into condescending tones. Perhaps your species is simply unsuited to the rigors of colonial expansion. The Outer Rim has always been contested space. If humanity cannot defend its settlements, perhaps humanity should remain on its homeworld. More laughter. The Vraxian delegation, massive reptilian, beings with armored scales that had evolved on a world of perpetual warfare, clicked their claws together in their species. Version of mocking applause. Reed's jaw tightened. He had expected this. 3 months of diplomatic channels had taught him that the Confederation viewed humanity as children playing at civilization. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. Most species in this chamber had been traveling the stars for millennia. With respect, Chancellor, we're not asking for territorial advantages, Reed said carefully. We're asking for basic protection under Confederation law. The Vraxians are violating 7 different accords, including the prohibition on targeting non-combatants. We have documentation. Documentation. The Vraxian Prime Speaker, General Cray Thorax, rose to his full 3-meter height. His voice boomed through the translation systems. The humans whine about documentation while their colonies encroach on territories. My ancestors conquered 10,000 years before their species invented the wheel. They cry about violations while refusing to understand the fundamental truth of the galaxy. The strong take what they wish, and the weak submit or die. The assembly erupted in a cacophony of responses, some supporting, some protesting, most simply entertained by the spectacle. Reed noticed the pattern he'd observed over weeks of these sessions. The elder species were amused, the younger ones sympathetic but silent, and the truly ancient ones simply didn't care. Reed raised his hand, requesting silence. The gesture itself drew chuckles, such a primitive means of communication. When the noise subsided enough for him to be heard, he spoke quietly, forcing them to listen. Please, he said, and the word carried a weight that momentarily stilled the chamber. We didn't come to the stars looking for war. We came with hope, with dreams of finding neighbors among the stars, of learning from civilizations older and wiser than our own. We've tried every diplomatic channel. We've made every concession short of abandoning our people to die. He paused, meeting the eyes or optical sensors, or consciousness fields of as many delegates as he could. I'm begging you. As one representative of sapient life to another, help us find a peaceful solution. Because if you don't, Reed's voice dropped even lower. Please don't make us mad. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter came, louder than before. Chancellor Zixther's entire form flickered with mirth colors. Is that a threat, Ambassador? Is humanity, with its 40-year-old star drive and its handful of colony worlds, threatening the Galactic Confederation? It's not a threat, Reed said quietly. It's a warning. And a plea. General Kraythorax stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow across the human delegation. Let me make something clear, little human. The Vraxian sovereignty has existed for 50,000 years. We have reduced 100 civilizations to ash. Your entire species history, from the first stone tool to your newest colony, ship is less than a heartbeat in our empire's story. You will withdraw from the outer rim, or we will exterminate every human colony world, one by one, until you learn your place. He leaned closer, his breath hot and rank. And your confederation will do nothing, because they understand what you apparently do not. Might makes right among the stars. Reed stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to back away from the predator before him. I've delivered my message, he said. The choice now belongs to this council. The vote was called. Of the 847 species represented, 791 voted against human protection. 56 voted in favor, mostly young species, who remembered their own struggles against aggressive neighbors. Humanity's request for intervention was denied. As the session closed, Reed gathered his materials with methodical precision. His hands didn't shake. His face remained carefully neutral. But everyone who knew him would have recognized the signs, the set of his jaw, the deliberate movements, the too calm demeanor. Ambassador Chun, his second in command, touched his arm gently. Marcus, send the report to Earth, he said quietly. Every word, every vote, every laugh. 3 months later, the warning became prophecy. The Vraxian Third Fleet arrived at New Haven, humanity's newest colony world. 50,000 settlers had built lives their farms, spreading across fertile valleys. Schools where children learned under an alien sun. Hospitals where the first generation born off Earth took their first breaths. The Vraxians broadcast their intentions before they fired. General Kraythorax himself delivered the message. This is what happens to species that don't know their place. The orbital bombardment lasted 6 hours. They targeted the hospitals first at deliberate choice, then the schools, then the residential sectors. The agricultural zones burned last, ensuring that any survivors would starve. 40-7,000 dead. 3,000 survivors pulled from the ruins, most of them traumatized beyond recovery. When the Vraxian fleet jumped away, they left behind a single message buoy, broadcasting to all human colonies. Submit or join New Haven. Reed received the news in his quarters at Earth's embassy station. He watched the footage only once. The images of children's toys scattered among the rubble, of the hospital's pediatric wing collapsed into a crater, of rescue workers weeping as they pulled out body after small body. He composed a message to Earth Command. 5 words. Ambassadors are coming home. Then he requested one final session before the Galactic Council. They granted it, of course. The elder species were curious to see humanity's formal surrender. The younger ones came out of sympathy. The Vraxians came to gloat. Reed stood on the platform one last time. He carried no holographic displays, no evidence folders, no diplomatic protocols. He simply stood there, looking at each delegation in turn. I came here 3 months ago and begged you to intervene, he said. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. I warned you what would happen if you didn't. You laughed. You called us weak, primitive, arrogant for thinking we deserve protection under your laws. He paused, and in that pause, something shifted in the chamber. The delegates noticed his posture, no longer supplicant, but still centered, calm in a way that made some of the more perceptive species suddenly uneasy. The Vraxians murdered 47,000 civilians on New Haven. They broadcast their intentions. They boasted about targeting our children. And you double quotes. Reed's gaze swept the assembly. You did nothing. What did you expect? Chancellor Zixter's voice held irritation now, poured with the drama. As we explained, the strong, I know what you told me. Reed interrupted, and the sheer audacity of cutting off the High Chancellor sent a ripple of shock through the assembly. I understood your position perfectly. That's why I'm here now, to make sure there's no confusion about what happens next. General Craythorax laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Are you declaring war, human? Will you throw your primitive ships against the might of... We're not declaring anything, Reed said. We're informing you. All human ambassadors are being recalled. All diplomatic channels are closed. All trade agreements are void. And you, General Craythorax, along with every species that voted to abandon us, that laughed at our warning. Reed's expression never changed, but his next words fell like a judge's final sentence. You were warned. We begged you to stop. We tried every path to peace. You chose violence. You chose to teach us that mercy is weakness, that compassion is foolishness, that the only language the galaxy respects is force. He took a breath. Message received. He turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the platform. We told you. Please don't make us mad. Reed looked back one last time, and several delegates would later swear his eyes held something they had never seen in a human before, something cold and ancient and absolutely certain. You should have listened. The human delegation walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall. They would never return not in the following week. Something strange began happening across human-controlled space. Every human vessel, commercial, colonial, scientific, began broadcasting the same repeating signal. It wasn't a distress call or a political message. It was a frequency, pulsing in a pattern that seemed random, but wasn't. Galactic intelligence agencies analyzed it, trying to decode the message. They found nothing. Some dismissed it as grief-driven irrationality. Others noted it in their reports and moved on. The Vraxian sovereignty held a victory celebration on their homeworld, toasting the extermination of New Haven and planning their next strike. The Galactic Confederation returned to business as usual. Trade routes remained open. Treaties were signed. The younger species mourned quietly for humanity, but dared not speak too loudly. And in the darkness beyond the rim of known space, in the cold void between stars where no sensors could penetrate, something waited. Humanity had 40 years in the stars. What the galaxy didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was what humanity had been doing with those 40 years. The colonies were visible, the trade ships public, the settlements documented, but the shipyards hidden in rogue planet systems, the research facilities in the cores of dead stars, the manufacturing complexes in dark matter clouds, those remained secret. Humanity had come to the stars, hoping for peace, but they had prepared for war. On the 7th day, after Ambassador Reed's final address, the signal changed. The frequency shifted, and across 300 light-years of human space, something activated. The Vraxian listening posts along the border detected it first, a gravitational distortion, massive and moving fast. Their sensors couldn't make sense of the readings. Ships were emerging from quantum stealth, but the numbers were impossible. Hundreds, thousands. General Craythorax received the report in his victory hall, still drunk on triumph. He read it twice, then laughed. The humans found a few warships and think they can challenge us? Send the 3rd and 5th fleets? We'll end. This quickly, and his aide interrupted, something that would normally earn immediate execution. General, you don't understand. It's not a few ships, it's... He struggled with the translation. It's everything. They're everywhere. Our entire border is lighting up with contacts, and they're not like any design we've seen. The sensor profiles don't make sense. Some of them appear to be phasing in and out of reality itself. Cray Thorax strode to the command center, his earlier amusement curdling into unease. The tactical display showed the Vraxian human border, and his veteran commander's instincts immediately recognized what he was seeing. This wasn't a retaliation fleet. This was an extermination armada. And at the head of that armada, broadcast on every frequency, a new message began to play. Not from Ambassador Reed this time, but from someone else, a woman's voice, calm and precise. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Human Defense Force. You were warned. Now you will learn what happens when you make humanity mad. The transmission ended, and the human fleet began to move. The galaxy was about to discover what a species that mastered nuclear weapons before leaving their homeworld, that fought 2 world wars before reaching their own moon, that turned suffering into art and tragedy into determination. What such a species could accomplish when given 40 years. Unlimited resources, and a reason to be afraid. They had spent 4 decades building, testing, innovating in secret, while playing the role of naive newcomers. The performance was over. The age of mercy had ended. Asterisk. The RECK-09G, the first battle of Vraxian Prime, lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. It would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years, not for its duration, but for what it revealed about the true nature of human warfare. General, Cray Thorax had commanded fleets for 3 centuries. He had conquered 47 worlds and broken a dozen civilizations. When the human armada appeared on his sensors, he felt no fear-only irritation that he'd have to delay his victory celebrations to crush this pathetic retaliation. The Vraxian 3rd, 5th, and 7th fleets moved to intercept over 1,500 warships, each one a dreadnought that had survived countless battles. Their shields could withstand direct star-core impacts. Their weapons could crack planets. They were the apex of conventional galactic warfare. They never saw what killed them. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Vraxian flagship's sensors registered an impossible reading. 300 contacts had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed ceased. The quantum signatures vanished as if they had never been there at all. Probability mines. Admiral Chun's voice came through on all Vraxian frequencies, calm and almost educational. We collapsed the probability wave function of your ships existing in this timeline. They're not destroyed. They simply never arrived at this battle. From your perspective, they've vanished. From the universe's perspective, they took a different path 3 hours ago and are currently halfway to the galactic rim, very confused. Cray Thorax stared at his tactical display, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. That's impossible. You can't manipulate causality. The fundamental laws of physics. The laws you know, Chun interrupted. Now, let me show you what else you don't know. The human fleet decloaked. The Vraxians had expected primitive vessels, perhaps slightly more advanced than the colony ships they'd seen. What materialized before them defied every principle of starship design known to galactic civilization. The human warships were beautiful in the way a predator is beautiful sleek, purposeful, stripped of everything except function. But it was what they did that shattered the Vraxians' understanding of warfare. The first wave of human ships designated Sentinel class weren't ships at all. They were quantum-entangled AI warfare systems, each one networked to create a distributed consciousness that operated across 300 vessels simultaneously. They moved with perfect coordination, anticipating Vraxian tactics before commanders could finish issuing orders. The Sentinel class didn't fire weapons. They released swarms. Millions of nanoscale machines poured from each vessel, forming clouds that looked like silver mist. When they touched Vraxian shields, they didn't explode or burn through. They learned. Within seconds, each nanomachine had analyzed the shield frequency, communicated the data across the swarm network, and adapted. The shields meant nothing. The swarms flowed through them like they weren't there, coating Vraxian holes, finding every seam, every port, every microscopic imperfection. Then they began to disassemble the ships at the molecular level, converting matter into more nanomachines, which joined the swarm, which grew exponentially. A Vraxian dreadnought that had survived 2 centuries of warfare dissolved into component atoms in 43 seconds. Targeting our shields is illegal. Kraythorax roared, his tactical doctrine crumbling. The Confederation Accords specifically prohibit nano-warfare, and we're not part of your Confederation anymore, Shen replied. Remember? You voted to abandon us. That vote had consequences. The second wave of human vessels opened fire with what Galactic intelligence would later designate as gravity lances, concentrated beams of manipulated spacetime that didn't destroy ships so much as crush them into singularities. A Vraxian battlecruiser, 3 kilometers long and massing more than a small moon, was compressed into a sphere 20 centimeters in diameter. Its mass remained constant. Its volume did not. The gravitational distortion from the compressed ship caught 4 other Vraxian vessels, pulling them into a fatal spiral. Weapons that create artificial black holes are forbidden by, Kraythorax's voice cracked. By laws we never agreed to, Chun finished. You taught us that the strong take what they want. We're learning your lessons very well, General. The third wave didn't fire at all. They simply existed near Vraxian ships, and reality began to break down. These were humanity's reality anchors vessels that stabilized normal spacetime around themselves, while causing everything outside their field to experience temporal and spatial distortions. Vraxian warships aged 10,000 years in seconds, their hulls corroding to dust. Others found themselves phasing partially out of normal space, their crews experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. The screens on Vraxian communication channels became incomprehensible as minds tried to process existing in past, present, and future at once. Kraythorax, watching his fleet disintegrate, felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries. Primal, overwhelming fear. Cease fire, we surrender. In the name of the RECKO9G, the first battle of Vraxian. Prime lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. It would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years, not for its duration, but for what it revealed about the true nature of human warfare. General, Kraythorax had commanded fleets for 3 centuries. He had conquered 47 worlds and broken a dozen civilizations. When the human armada appeared on his sensors, he felt no fear, only irritation that he'd have to delay his victory celebrations to crush this pathetic retaliation. The Vraxian 3rd, 5th, and 7th fleets moved to intercept over 1,500 warships, each one a dreadnought that had survived countless battles. Their shields could withstand direct star core impacts. Their weapons could crack planets. They were the apex of conventional galactic warfare. They never saw what killed them. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Vraxian flagship sensors registered an impossible reading. 300 contacts had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, ceased. The quantum signatures vanished as if they had never been there at all. Probability mines. Admiral Chun's voice came through on all Vraxian frequencies, calm and almost educational. We collapsed the probability wave function of your ships existing in this timeline. They're not destroyed. They simply never arrived at this battle. From your perspective, they vanished. From the universe's perspective, they took a different path 3 hours ago and are currently halfway to the galactic rim. Very confused, Thorax stared at his tactical display, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. That's impossible. You can't manipulate causality. The fundamental laws of physics. The laws you know, Chun interrupted. Now, let me show you what else you don't know. The human fleet decloaked. The Vraxians had expected primitive vessels, perhaps slightly more advanced than the colony ships they'd seen. What materialized before them defied every principle of starship design known to galactic civilization. The human warships were beautiful in the way a predator is beautiful sleek. Purposeful, stripped of everything except function. But it was what they did that shattered the Vraxians' understanding of warfare. The first wave of human ships designated Sentinel-class weren't ships at all. They were quantum-entangled AI warfare systems, each one networked to create a distributed consciousness that operated across 300 vessels simultaneously. They moved with perfect coordination, anticipating Vraxian tactics before commanders could finish issuing orders. The Sentinel class didn't fire weapons. They released swarms. Millions of nanoscale machines poured from each vessel, forming clouds that looked like silver mist. When they touched Vraxian shields, they didn't explode or burn through. They learned. Within seconds, each nanomachine had analyzed the shield frequency, communicated the data across the swarm network, and adapted. The shields meant nothing. The swarms flowed through them like they weren't there, coding Vraxian hulls, finding every seam, every port, every microscopic imperfection. Then they began to disassemble the ships at the molecular level, converting matter into more nanomachines which joined the swarm, which grew exponentially. A Vraxian dreadnought that had survived 2 centuries of warfare dissolved into component atoms in 43 seconds. Targeting our shields is illegal. Thorax roared, his tactical doctrine crumbling. The Confederation Accords specifically prohibit nano-warfare, and we're not part of your Confederation anymore, Chun replied. Remember? You voted to abandon us. That vote had consequences. The second wave of human vessels opened fire with what Galactic intelligence would later designate as gravity. Lances concentrated beams of manipulated space-time that didn't destroy ships so much as crushed them into singularities. A Vraxian battlecruiser, 3 kilometers long and massing more than a small moon, was compressed into a sphere 20 centimeters in diameter. Its mass remained constant. Its volume did not. The gravitational distortion from the compressed ship caught 4 other Vraxian vessels, pulling them into a fatal spiral. Weapons that create artificial black holes are forbidden by Thorax's voice cracked. By laws we never agreed to, Chun finished. You taught us that the strong take what they want. We're learning your lessons very well, General. The third wave didn't fire at all. They simply existed near Vraxian ships, and reality began to break down. These were humanity's reality, Anchor's vessels. That stabilized normal spacetime around themselves, while causing everything outside their field to experience temporal and spatial distortions. Vraxian warships aged 10,000 years in seconds, their hulls corroding to dust. Others found themselves phasing partially out of normal space, their crews experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. The screens on Vraxian communication channels became incomprehensible as minds tried to process existing in past, present, and future at once. Thorax, watching his fleet disintegrate, felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries. Primal, overwhelming fear. Cease fire. We surrender. In the name of, you surrendered after 4 hours and 17 minutes. Chun's voice remained clinically calm. We accept your surrender. But not yet. You see, General, We've learned another lesson from you, the one you taught us at New Haven. The human fleet shifted formation, and a new class of vessels moved forward. These were smaller, more compact, and they moved with frightening purpose toward Vraxian Prime itself. You taught us that targeting civilians sends a message, Chun continued. You showed us that bombing hospitals and schools demonstrates strength. You wanted to teach humanity about the law of the strong. Consider this your final exam. No. Kraythorak's voice broke into something almost like a plea. Our homeworld has 40 billion civilians. You can't, you're not monsters like us. You're right, Chun agreed. We're not like you. We're not going to murder your children or bomb your hospitals. But we are going to make sure you never threaten anyone again. The small vessels entered Vraxian Prime's atmosphere, and instead of weapons fire, they released something else of viral code, transmitted on every frequency. It swept through the planet's defense networks, its communication systems, its power grids. Within minutes, every piece of Vraxian military technology on the planet simply stopped working. Ships fell from the sky, their drives dead. Weapons facilities powered down. Command centers went dark. The entire military-industrial complex of a civilization that had conquered worlds for 50,000 years became inert, but the hospitals stayed powered. The schools' lights remained on. The civilian infrastructure continued functioning. We've neutralized your military capability, Sean announced. Your people are safe. Your children are unharmed. Your hospitals are fully operational. But your ability to wage war has ended. You will rebuild, but you will rebuild as a species that has learned the cost of cruelty. Kraythorak stared at his screens, watching his homeworld's defenses go dark while civilian sectors blazed with life. Why? He whispered. Why not just ... end us? We would have exterminated you. Because we're not you, Chun replied simply. We warned you not to make us mad, not because we wanted to destroy you, but because we knew what we'd become if we did. You forced our hand, General. You made us show the galaxy our weapons. But you can't make us become monsters. That's a choice, and we choose differently. The battle, if it could be called that, ended. The Vraxian sovereignty, an empire 50,000 years old, had been defeated in less time than it took their homeworld to rotate once. But the war wasn't over. 72 hours after the Battle of Vraxian Prime, humanity unleashed the Ragnarok Protocol. Every species that had voted against human protection, every empire that had mocked Ambassador Reed's warning, every civilization that had laughed at humanity's play for peace, they all received the same message. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Human Defense Force. You were given a choice. You chose violence. You chose to abandon us to extermination. You chose to teach us that mercy is weakness. We learned. Now you will learn what happens when you educate a species as young and adaptable as humanity in the ways of galactic warfare. Across 300 light years, human fleets emerged from quantum stealth. They had been there all along, positioned near every hostile homeworld, every aggressive empire, every species that had participated in humanity's abandonment. The Korthax Dominion, which had led the voting bloc against human protection, found their entire war fleet disabled in 18 minutes. The Zeloth hierarchy, whose ambassador had called humans evolutionary mistakes, watched their weapons platforms dissolve into atomic clouds. The Torvin Collective, who had supplied the Vraxians with targeting data for New Haven, saw their communication networks crash as human cyber warfare rewrote their entire digital infrastructure. None of them were destroyed. None of their civilians were harmed. But their capacity for warfare, built over millennia, was systematically dismantled in less than 3 days. The galaxy called it the 72-hour war. Though historians would argue it wasn't a war at all, it was a demonstration. Asterisk. Humanity had spent 40 years preparing, building, innovating in secret. While playing the role of eager newcomers, they had been constructing an arsenal that made every weapon in the galaxy obsolete. They had studied every galactic species warfare doctrine, identified every weakness, and developed countermeasures to technologies that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. The elder species, comfortable in their supremacy, had forgotten what innovation meant. Humanity, raised in a crucible of constant conflict and existential threats, had never stopped evolving. On the third day, as the last aggressive fleet fell silent, an emergency session of the Galactic Council convened. The Grand Assembly Hall, once filled with arrogant certitude, now thrummed with barely controlled panic. High Chancellor Zixter, his crystalline form flickering with fear colors, instead of his usual smug luminescence, addressed the remaining delegates. We must negotiate. The humans have clearly demonstrated capabilities we didn't anticipate. Perhaps we were hasty in our initial assessment. Hasty? Ambassador Chun no longer second in command, but humanity's new voice to the galaxy stood on the platform where Marcus Reed had begged for help months ago. You voted 791 to 56 to abandon us to genocide. You laughed when we warned you. You celebrated when our children died. And now, when you're the ones facing overwhelming force, suddenly you want to negotiate? The silence was absolute. Chun looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or sensors or consciousness fields of species that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant. Here are humanity's terms, not negotiations' terms. You will accept them, or you will face the consequences. She manipulated the holographic display, and a document appeared before every delegation. First, the Galactic Confederation will be restructured. No more voting based on age of civilization. Every species gets equal representation. The strong don't automatically rule. That's the logic that led to New Haven. Murmurs of protest rippled through the chamber. Chun ignored them. Second, a new accord will be established, the Sanctuary Protocol. Any species that commits genocide, that deliberately targets civilians, that engages in the tactics the Vraxians used against us, will face immediate intervention. Not by request, not by vote, by mandate. And humanity will enforce it. You would make yourselves the galaxy's police force? Zixter's voice held indignation trying to mask fear. Someone has to be, Chun replied. You had millennia to build a just system. You created one where the strong prey on the weak and call it natural law. That ends now. We offered to work within your system. You refused. So we're building a new one. Third, technology sharing. The weapons you've seen represent a fraction of human capabilities. We will share defensive technologies with any species that agrees to the new accords. Shields that can withstand the weapons we just demonstrated. Cyber defenses against digital warfare. Medical technologies that will extend your lifespans and cure diseases you thought incurable. That got their attention. Greed flickered across the chamber, even in defeat. They wanted power. But Chun continued. Any species that uses these technologies aggressively, that employs them to conquer or subjugate others, will find that every piece of tech we've shared has a built-in kill switch. We will turn your own defenses against you. We gave you a chance to do the right thing because it was right. Now we're giving you a chance to do the right thing because the alternative is unthinkable. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Fourth and finally, New Haven will be rebuilt. Every species that voted against our protection will contribute resources, technology, and labor to the reconstruction. You will help us bury our dead. You will help us build a memorial. You will look at what your indifference enabled, and you will remember the cost of cruelty. And if we refuse, General Craythorax, present via hologram from his disabled flagship, asked quietly. The fight had gone out of him. Sean's expression didn't change. Then we continue the demonstration. We've shown you what we can do to military targets while sparing civilians. Imagine what we could do if we stopped being merciful. The vote was called. Of 847 species, 847 voted to accept humanity's terms. It was unanimous. 6 months later, Ambassador Marcus Reed stood on New Haven, or what was being rebuilt as New Haven. The memorial was nearly complete. A structure of black stone and preserved ruins. Names of the dead etched in letters that would last 10,000 years. Around him, construction crews from 100 species worked to rebuild what the Vraxians had destroyed. Korthax engineers installed power systems. Zeloth architects designed new schools with better safety features. Even Vraxian laborers worked alongside humans, young ones who had been born after their empire's fall, learning a different way. Admiral Chun joined him, watching the sunset over the construction site. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked quietly. Reed was silent for a long moment. "We did the necessary thing," he finally said. "We begged them for peace. We warned them what would happen. They chose to ignore us, and 47,000 people died because of it. We couldn't let that stand. But now they fear us," Chun observed. "The younger species look at us with hope, but the elder ones, they're terrified. We've become what we fought against, the ones who rule through superior force." "No," Reed shook his head. "We've become what we had to become to survive. The difference is what we do with that power. The Vraxians use their strength to conquer and destroy. We're using ours to protect and rebuild. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" Chun pressed. "We forced our will on the galaxy. We dictated terms at gunpoint, quantum probability manipulation device point. But still, how is that different from what the Confederation did?" Reed turned to face her, and his expression was weary but certain. "Because we didn't want this. Because we tried every other option first. Because when we had the power to exterminate our enemies, we chose not to. Because we're building hospitals, not weapons platforms. Because we're sharing technology instead of hoarding it. Because we remember what it felt like to be the weak ones begging for help." He looked back at the memorial, at the names carved in stone. "We told them, please don't make us mad. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning from people who knew what they were capable of, but didn't want to prove it. They forced our hand. They made us show the galaxy our teeth. But they couldn't make us become monsters. That's the difference, Sarah. That's what makes us different from them." Sean nodded slowly. "The younger species are calling it the awakening. They say humanity woke up the galaxy, showed them that age doesn't equal wisdom, that power doesn't equal right. And what are the elder species calling it?" "The humiliation," Chun said with a slight smile. 50,000-year-old empires brought down by 40-year-old upstarts. They'll never forgive us for that." "They don't have to forgive us," Reed replied. "They just have to respect us. And more importantly, they have to respect each other. That's what the new accords are really about, forcing civilizations that have spent millennia taking what they want to finally consider the cost." A human child ran past them, chasing a ball, laughing. A year ago, that sound would have been impossible here. Now it was rebuilding soundtrack. "Do you think it will last?" Chun asked. "The peace we forced on them?" Reed watched the child play, watched species that had been enemies for centuries, working together on the construction site, watched the sun set on a world that had been ash and was becoming home again. "It will last as long as we remain strong enough to enforce it," he said, "and as long as we remain wise enough not to abuse that strength. That's the burden we've taken on, Sarah. We're not just humanity's defenders anymore. We're the galaxy's conscience." We have to be better than they were. We have to prove that might doesn't automatically corrupt, that power can be wielded with mercy. And if we fail? Chan asked. If humanity becomes what we fought against? Then some other young species will rise up and teach us the same lesson we taught the Confederation, Reed said simply. That's how it works. That's how it should work. Power should always be answerable to justice. And justice should always be tempered with mercy. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the memorial one more time. We told them not to make us mad, he said softly. We begged them. We warned them. They didn't listen. Now they know the truth, that humanity's plea for peace wasn't weakness. It was mercy. And when they forced us to stop being merciful, they learned what 40 years of secret preparation, unlimited resources, and existential fear could create. What did it create? Chun asked, though she knew the answer. Reed's expression was somber. A species that can end civilizations before breakfast and still chooses to rebuild them instead. That's what they made us become. I just hope we can stay that species, the ones who remember what it's like to be vulnerable, who choose compassion even when we don't have to, who wield the biggest stick in the galaxy and use it to defend rather than conquer. They stood together in silence as the sun set on New Haven, watching a world rise from ashes because humanity had finally answered the galaxy's cruelty with overwhelming force and unexpected mercy. The message had been delivered. The galaxy had learned.